About 2,700 years ago, Jerusalem experienced a night of tense calm. The city was surrounded by a massive army of 185,000 Assyrian soldiers, ready to conquer the last fortress of the kingdom of Judah. King Hezekiah and his people prayed fervently inside the walls, aware that dawn might bring their destruction. However, something extraordinary was about to happen. According to the Bible, on that night, a single angel of the Lord would defeat that powerful army. While this seems unbelievable, recently, archaeologist Stephen Compton published a groundbreaking study in the Near Eastern Archaeology Journal. He claims to have found evidence of the exact location where this miraculous event occurred. This narrative, recorded in the books of 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, and Isaiah, has often been considered by many as a myth, or at best, a poetic exaggeration. But what if it's true? What if we can confirm that one of the most remarkable events in biblical history took place? This video will delve into this fascinating discovery, examining the archaeological evidence, historical context, and the mysteries surrounding this incredible account of divine intervention. To fully understand the significance of this story and Compton's discovery, we must go back in time and grasp the historical context. We are in 701 BC. The scene is the ancient Near East, a region marked by constant conflicts between empires. The kingdom of Judah, ruled by King Hezekiah in Jerusalem, is one of the last strongholds resisting the powerful Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians, led by King Sennacherib, had already conquered the neighboring kingdom of Israel and deported much of its population. Now their sights were set on Judah. Sennacherib was notorious for his brutality. His military campaigns were characterized by mass destruction, large-scale deportations, and a calculated policy of terror to break his enemies' resistance. For Hezekiah and his people, the approach of the Assyrian army was not just a political and military threat, but an existential threat to their nation, culture, and faith. The Bible recounts that facing imminent danger, Hezekiah began preparing for the siege. He reinforced the walls of Jerusalem, constructed an underground tunnel to ensure the city's water supply, an impressive feat of ancient engineering that still exists today, and reorganized his troops. But Hezekiah knew that these measures would not be enough against the Assyrian might, so he decided to define his reign and change history. He turned to God. The Bible provides a vivid account of the subsequent events. In the book of 2 Kings, chapter 19, we read that Hezekiah went to the Lord's temple and prayed earnestly. His prayer is a profound testament to faith and humility. O Lord God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim, you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. You made the heavens and the earth. Give ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see. Listen to the words Sennacherib has sent to ridicule the living God. Hezekiah acknowledges the seriousness of the situation, admitting that the Assyrians have indeed destroyed nations and their gods. Still, he makes an important distinction. They were not gods, but only wooden and stone artifacts made by human hands. Now, O Lord our God, deliver us from his hand, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, O Lord, are God. This prayer is not just a plea for salvation, but a declaration of God's sovereignty over all nations, and a challenge to the idea that power is the supreme force in the world. It is a moment of vulnerability and absolute trust, where a powerful king humbles himself before God on behalf of his people. According to the Bible, the response to this prayer was as dramatic as unexpected. The biblical narrative says God's answer to Hezekiah's prayer was immediate and powerful. Through the prophet Isaiah, God sent a message of comfort and promise. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: I have heard your prayer concerning Sennacherib, king of Assyria. God then pronounces judgment against Sennacherib, mocking his arrogance and declaring that his plans will not succeed. The message concludes with a surprising promise. "I will defend this city and save it for my sake and for the sake of my servant David." This promise is remarkable not only for its boldness. After all, Jerusalem was surrounded by one of the most powerful armies of the time, but also for its motivation. God declares that he will act to save his people, defend his honor, and fulfill his previous promises. It is a powerful affirmation of God's faithfulness and active involvement in human affairs. But how would this promise be fulfilled? According to the Bible, the answer would come in a way no one could have anticipated. The climax of the story is described in 2 Kings 19:35 with striking simplicity. That night, the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. When the people arose the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. This single verse describes one of the Bible's most remarkable and miraculous events. Imagine the scene: a vast army, confident of imminent victory, encamped around Jerusalem, and then, in the silence of the night, a single celestial being descends and, in a few hours, wipes out 185,000 soldiers. It is a simultaneously terrifying and fascinating image, a testament to the divine power that defies human understanding. The Bible does not detail how the angel accomplished this monumental task, leaving room for imagination and speculation. Could it have been through some plague or sudden illness, a natural phenomenon of catastrophic proportions completely beyond our comprehension? Whatever happened, the result was clear. In a single night, the most powerful army of the time was reduced to nothing, without Jerusalem's forces drawing a single sword. The consequences of this miraculous event are described in the following verses. The Bible recounts that Sennacherib, king of Assyria, broke camp and withdrew to Nineveh, where he remained. This abrupt retreat is notable for several reasons. First, it represents a devastating humiliation for Sennacherib, who had boasted of his invincibility. Second, it marks a radical change in Judah's historical trajectory. Jerusalem would likely have fallen without this intervention, as many other cities before it had. The people of Judah would have been deported and scattered among the nations, just like their northern kingdom counterparts. The course of Jewish history, and by extension the history of monotheism and Christianity, would have been profoundly altered. This event was a military victory and a powerful assertion of God's sovereignty and will to protect his chosen people. It is a pivotal moment in the biblical narrative, showing that the God of Israel was not just another local deity, but the Lord of all creation, capable of toppling the mightiest empires with a single act of his will. Today, 2,700 years later, the discoveries of archaeologist Stephen Compton shed new light on this ancient story. In his research, published in Near Eastern Archaeology, Compton claims to have found physical evidence that supports the biblical account. His excavations focused on a specific area around Jerusalem, which he believes to be the site of the epic confrontation between the angel of the Lord and the Assyrian army. The choice of this site was not random. Stephen Compton, an independent scholar specializing in Near Eastern archaeology, used modern mapping techniques to identify what he believes are remnants of the Assyrian military base described in these biblical stories. In the June edition of Near Eastern Archaeology, Compton's research reveals significant findings that align with historical accounts of Sennacherib's campaign. Compton identified potential locations by comparing ancient sculptures from Sennacherib's palace in Nineveh, now Mosul in northern Iraq, with early 20th century aerial photographs. These sculptures depict the siege of Lachish, a city 42 miles south of Jerusalem, and include detailed illustrations of an Assyrian military camp. By cross-referencing these sculptures with photographs, Compton located an oval structure north of Lachish, matching the typical design of Assyrian camps. The site, known as Kabet al-Mudara, translating from Arabic to ruins of the invaders' camp, indicates historical recognition of its military significance. At another nearby location, identified as Jebel el-Mudara, or Mount of Ammunition, relevant discoveries were also made. Compton discovered oval fortifications initially thought to be Roman camps due to their location and design. Subsequent analyses showed that their layout was consistent with Assyrian military camps, which were characteristically oval, unlike the rectangular Roman camps. The Assyrian Empire, which reigned from 365 to 609 BC, was known for its extensive military campaigns to expand territory. The siege of Jerusalem by Sennacherib in 701 BC was part of this broader strategy to control routes through the Syrian desert to the Mediterranean Sea. During the 1930s, the British established an ammunition storage depot on Ammunition Hill, later fortified by the Jordanian army in 1948. The site saw intense fighting during the Six-Day War in 1967, when Israeli forces captured it. Today, Ammunition Hill is a memorial and museum dedicated to this crucial battle. Although the archaeological evidence discovered by Compton does not confirm the supernatural aspects of the biblical narrative, it provides convincing support for the historical presence of Assyrian military forces near Jerusalem during Sennacherib's reign. Compton also carefully examined Assyrian records from the period to corroborate his archaeological findings. While Sennacherib's official records do not mention a catastrophic defeat, which is not surprising given that Assyrian kings rarely admitted defeats in their annals, there are some intriguing inconsistencies in their accounts. For example, while Sennacherib boasts of having besieged Jerusalem and trapped Hezekiah like a bird in a cage, he never claims to have captured the city or decisively defeated Hezekiah. This omission is unusual considering the typical pattern of Assyrian campaigns where conquered cities were plundered and their leaders humiliated or executed. Additionally, Compton noted a sudden change in Sennacherib's campaign patterns after the Jerusalem event. The Assyrian king's subsequent campaigns were notably less ambitious and expansive. This might suggest that something catastrophic happened to his army, forcing him to retreat and reconsider his military strategy. Though not conclusive, these circumstantial pieces of evidence align with the biblical narrative of the sudden and devastating defeat of the Assyrian army. Compton's interpretation of these findings is bold and controversial. He proposes that what his team discovered could indeed be the site of the angelic intervention described in the Bible. He argues that the precise correspondence with the historical period and geographical location points to a unique and extraordinary event, which aligns remarkably well with the biblical account of the destruction of Sennacherib's army by an angel of the Lord. Compton does not claim to have definitively proven the occurrence of a miracle, but suggests that the archaeological evidence is consistent with a catastrophic and sudden event that affected many people simultaneously. He argues that, whatever the final explanation for these discoveries, they provide a solid basis for considering the biblical account as more than just a myth or legend, but as a record of a real historical event that left detectable physical traces. In recent decades, a growing body of archaeological discoveries seems to confirm various aspects of the biblical narrative, from historical figures mentioned in the Bible to details of cultural practices and historical events. However, the case of Sennacherib's army is particularly intriguing due to the extraordinary nature of the event described and the specificity of the evidence found by Compton. Returning to the biblical narrative, it is fascinating to consider the impact this event would have had on those who witnessed it. Imagine the shock and astonishment of the inhabitants of Jerusalem waking up the next morning to find that the powerful army threatening them had been annihilated overnight. The Bible does not provide many details about the immediate reaction of the city's inhabitants. Still, we can imagine the relief, gratitude, and reverent fear they must have felt. For Hezekiah and his people, this would have been a powerful confirmation of God's faithfulness and a dramatic validation of their faith. The event would likely have significantly strengthened Hezekiah's position as king and reaffirmed the centrality of worshipping Yahweh in Judah. At the same time, we can only speculate about the psychological impact this event would have had on the surviving Assyrians. The Bible tells us that Sennacherib dismantled the camp and withdrew to Nineveh, where he remained. This abrupt retreat from a king known for his cruelty suggests a level of shock and demoralization that must have been profound. The impact of this event extended far beyond the borders of Judah. In the ancient world, where the power of gods was often measured by the military success of the nations that worshipped them, the catastrophic defeat of the Assyrian army would have been seen as a dramatic demonstration of the power of the God of Israel. This would have had significant repercussions for the balance of power in the region. Nations that had previously trembled at Assyrian might now question the invincibility of the empire. Judah's prestige and that of its God would have increased considerably. This event might have contributed to Judah's survival as a distinct political and cultural entity for over a century until the Babylonian conquest in 586 BC. Moreover, the memory of this event would have a lasting impact on Jewish theology and spirituality. It would become a classic example of divine intervention in history, frequently cited in psalms and prayers as a reminder of God's power and faithfulness. The image of the angel of the Lord as a powerful protector and executor of divine judgment would become a recurring theme in biblical literature and later Jewish tradition. It is important to consider the theological significance of this event within the broader biblical narrative. The destruction of Sennacherib's army is not just an isolated miracle, but part of a larger story of redemption and divine judgment. This event demonstrates several important aspects of God's character and purposes from the biblical perspective. It shows God's sovereignty over all nations. Even the most powerful empires like Assyria are portrayed as powerless before divine might. It reaffirms God's commitment to his promises. The protection of Jerusalem is seen as a fulfillment of the promises made to David and his descendants. It illustrates the efficacy of prayer and faith. God's response to Hezekiah's prayer is swift and decisive, emphasizing the importance of trust in God during times of crisis. It warns against arrogance and excessive self-confidence, recurring themes in prophetic literature. If confirmed, Compton's discoveries have significant implications for our understanding of ancient history and the ongoing dialogue between faith and science. They challenge the notion that biblical accounts of miraculous events are necessarily incompatible with scientific investigation. On the other hand, it suggests that, in some cases, there might be physical evidence of events that challenge conventional explanations. This does not mean that science can prove the occurrence of miracles in the strict sense, but it indicates that there may be evidence consistent with accounts of such events. This perspective opens new possibilities for interdisciplinary studies of ancient history, combining archaeological methods, textual analysis, and theological considerations. At the same time, it is important to approach these discoveries with a balance of enthusiasm and caution. Like any science, archaeology is a continuous process of discovery and interpretation, and new evidence may emerge that supports, refines, or challenges current conclusions. The story of the angel and the 185,000 soldiers and the archaeological discoveries corroborating it invite us to reflect on broader questions of faith, history, and the nature of reality. How should we understand events that appear to defy natural laws? What is the relationship between faith and historical evidence? How can we interpret ancient texts in light of modern archaeological discoveries? These are not easy questions, and the answers will likely vary depending on individual philosophical and theological perspectives. However, what is clear is that discoveries such as Compton's force us to seriously consider the possibility that some of the most extraordinary events recorded in ancient texts may have a basis in historical reality. This does not diminish the element of faith involved in accepting these accounts, but suggests that faith and historical investigation are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Returning to the biblical text, examining more closely how this event is narrated and interpreted in the scriptures is crucial. The story appears not only in 2 Kings, but is repeated in 2 Chronicles and also mentioned in the book of Isaiah, demonstrating its importance in the biblical tradition. In 2 Chronicles 32:21, we read that King Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz, cried out to heaven in prayer because of this. Then the Lord sent an angel who destroyed all the mighty and brave men, the leaders and the officials in the Assyrian king's camp. Thus Sennacherib returned in disgrace to his land. This version emphasizes the role of prayer in invoking divine intervention, highlighting the partnership between the king and the prophet in the spiritual leadership of the nation. The mention that the angel destroyed mighty and brave men, leaders, and officials suggests a strategic blow that dismantled the command structure of the Assyrian army, rendering it incapable of continuing the campaign. The book of Isaiah provides even more context and theological interpretation of this event. In Isaiah 37:33-35, God declares through the prophet, "Therefore this is what the Lord says concerning the king of Assyria. He will not enter this city or shoot an arrow here. He will not come before it with shield or build a siege ramp against it. By the way that he came, he will return. He will not enter this city, declares the Lord. I will defend this city and save it, for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David." This passage emphasizes the absolute sovereignty of God over human affairs. The promise that no arrow will be shot against Jerusalem highlights the dramatic contrast between human expectations of war and the reality of divine intervention. Furthermore, the mention of "for my own sake and for my servant David" connects this event to the broader promises of God to the Davidic lineage and the future of Israel. In 2 Kings 19:35-37, the text continues after describing the destruction of the Assyrian army. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, broke camp and withdrew. He returned to Nineveh and stayed there. One day, while he was worshipping in the temple of his god, his sons Adramelech and Sharezer cut him down with the sword, and they escaped to the land of Ararat. And Esarhaddon, his son, succeeded him as king. This somber epilogue to Sennacherib's story is a powerful reminder of divine judgment and human frailty. The king who challenged the God of Israel ended up being killed in his temple by his sons. From a biblical perspective, this is not a mere historical coincidence, but a demonstration of divine justice and the consequences of human arrogance. The theological impact of this event on the biblical tradition is profound and enduring. It becomes a paradigmatic example of God's faithfulness to his promises and power to save his people against all odds. In the Psalms, several references seem to allude to this event. For example, Psalm 46, often associated with this incident, declares, "God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth will give way, and the mountains will fall into the heart of the sea. Come and see what the Lord has done, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire." The image of God breaking weapons and ending wars powerfully echoes the miraculous destruction of the Assyrian army. Isaiah, in particular, uses this demonstration of God's power as a basis for his prophecies about Israel's future liberation and restoration. In Isaiah 31:8-9, the prophet declares, "The Assyrian will fall by a sword, not of man, a sword not of mortals will devour him. He will flee from the sword, and his young men will be put to forced labor. His stronghold will fall because of terror. At the sight of the banner, his commanders will panic, declares the Lord, whose fire is in Zion, whose furnace is in Jerusalem." This passage not only recalls the miraculous defeat of the Assyrians, but also projects it as a model for future divine liberations. The story of the angel and the 185,000 soldiers also has significant implications for the biblical understanding of God's sovereignty over nations. It demonstrates that, from a biblical perspective, even the most powerful empires are subject to divine control. This becomes a recurring theme in prophetic literature, where God is often portrayed as the Lord of history, using even pagan nations as instruments of his greater purpose. In the case of Sennacherib, we see how God allows the Assyrian Empire to grow and threaten Judah, but then intervenes decisively when his honor and promises to his people are at stake. This view of history as a stage for divine action is central to biblical theology and continues to influence how many believers interpret global events today. In conclusion, the story of the angel and the 185,000 soldiers remains one of the Bible's most dramatic and theologically significant accounts. It exemplifies core themes of biblical faith: God's sovereignty, the power of prayer, divine faithfulness to promises, the consequences of human arrogance. Recent archaeological discoveries, such as those by Stephen Compton, add a new dimension to our appreciation of this account, suggesting that events that seem miraculous to modern eyes may have left detectable physical traces. Regardless of how we interpret the archaeological evidence, the biblical account continues to challenge and inspire us to consider the possibility of divine intervention in human history and reflect on our relationship with the divine in a world still marked by conflict and uncertainty. The story of the angel and the 185,000 soldiers remains a powerful reminder of the possibility of deliverance and hope, even in the most desperate circumstances. We have reached the end of our video, and I hope you like it. If you're looking for inspiration, knowledge, and spiritual connection, don't let this opportunity pass you by. Subscribe to our channel now, leave your like and comment to strengthen our community. And if you want to help us continue sharing religious stories that touch hearts, become a channel member. Together we can make a difference and strengthen our spiritual journey. We're counting on you. We've left the link in the description of this video so you can become a member today. Continue watching videos about the history of the Bible. I will leave 2 recommendations here on the screen. God bless you. We will get to the next video.